Hello world, it's Berto Prey 5 Cupla, and welcome to my review of Star Trek Picard, Season 3, Episode 3, 17 Seconds. Let me start off by saying this is going to be a little different than my previous two reviews. There are spoilers. There's one giant spoiler that I am not going to mention until later in the review because, and wait for it, I did not hate this episode. In fact, I thought this was a pretty good episode. I'm going to come out and say it. If this had been the first episode, I would be feeling very different. Okay? In fact, the truth is, I think you could start watching Picard from this episode and really not have missed much. They do show you what you needed to know in the previously on. It might even be better to have just started with episode 3 if this is going to be what we're going to get for the rest of the season. Then I can understand why so many people have changed their minds on the show. This was a different series, as far as I'm concerned, than what we have been getting. Are the sets still dark? Yes. I mean, the bridge is still dark. It honestly looked a bit brighter, and I have to go back, and I didn't do a shot-by-shot comparison, but it did look a bit brighter. Not as bright as a TNG bridge, by no means. But brighter than what we saw in episodes 1 and 2, I honestly think it was. The writing is still subpar. It's nowhere near TNG or DS9 greatness, but it's better than we got the first 2 episodes. Let me go through what's going on. And again, there are going to be spoilers. So, and if you have the opportunity or a way to watch the show, I suggest you do watch it before you watch my review. But I know a lot of people come to my reviews because they don't have the show. They don't want to watch it. They don't want to pay for it. And, one good episode does not a series make. So I get that. So I'm going to do my review, my kind of scene by scene breakdown. And when we get to the part where everything starts to change, I'll give a separate spoiler warning. Okay. So this episode picks up where last left off, but at the end of last episode, Captain Shaw basically put Admiral Picard in charge of the ship, of the Titan. But at the beginning of this episode, Captain Shaw is still kind of giving commands. Admiral Picard has kind of been pushed aside. They're headed into the nebula, and I'm thinking, oh, great. There's always a nebula around when you need one to hide from an enemy. It's been done in Trek many times before. This is just another time. And I was in my notes, I'm like, who's really in command here? Is it Captain Shaw? Is it Admiral Picard? Is it Captain Riker? You can just tell there's not a defined command structure. And I think, I would think for any ship, having 2 or 3 people in command is worse than having no one in command. Pretty shortly after that, they go back in time. They just label it before. And it's Riker and Picard, and they're at what appears to be Guinan's bar on Earth, but Guinan isn't there. In fact, the only people in the entire scene are just Riker and Picard in an empty bar, and not even a bartender. And this is back to when this, I guess, is 17 years ago, or so. I don't know if they said that or I just making that number up. But this is back when Riker's son, his first child, was just born, like maybe a month old. And Riker comes out to see Picard, and they're having a couple of drinks. They're talking like friends, and Picard is wishing him congratulations on becoming a parent, on having a son. It's all the stuff, Picard never got to do. And Riker is sharing with his friend. He's like recounting the story of his son's birth. And Picard's like, something didn't go well. He's like, yeah, he got called to sick bay from the bridge. And he said it was the longest 17-second in his turbo lift ride, was the longest 17 seconds of his life, his time to get from the bridge to sick bay. They don't go into detail as to what exactly went wrong or why he was called down, but we do know that his son was sick most or all of his life, and his son did pass away at a young age. We learned that in Picard season 1, and they'll tell us again in this episode if you didn't know it. So, but what struck me, and the first real nitpick I had with this episode, is while they're talking in the bar, Riker gets a call from Troi and Marina Sirtis, Counselor Troi, who's home with the baby. And, he gets a call. It just comes up in the air, basically, which is fine. But, and Troi is sounding like a new mother, talking about how the baby's had explosive diarrhea or vomiting or something. And how's Riker over there with his friends drinking, blah, 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 bring some alcohol home for her. But the entire time, Picard is there right next to Riker. Clearly, Troi should be able to see him. Troi doesn't mention or acknowledge Picard in any way whatsoever. It's like, I don't get it. Even if you had a camera phone today, if you got a FaceTime call, and you see your husband with his dear friend, your old captain, your dear friend, you don't even say hello? You don't acknowledge him in the slightest way? It took me out. Took me a little weird, but whatever. And then, I'm going to be honest, Riker and Picard holding hands. It seemed, not in a bad way, but it seemed a little gay. Okay? It just seemed a little gay. I know they're not, but you got these people out there who are just waiting for some plot line where they can write in the Picard, Riker, and anyway. Present day. We jump back to present day, and Captain Shaw has literally, okay, so they're in a nebula. The sensors aren't working because that's what happens in Star Trek nebulas. So Captain Shaw actually orders, I thought he was joking, but he actually ordered people to start looking out the windows. He has people stationed at windows in case anybody sees the Shrike. Which honestly, I guess isn't that bad of an idea if your sensors aren't working, but I would think the outside of the ship has cameras, and those cameras should work. Okay, I understand if sensors don't, but whatever. So people are looking outside windows, and there's this really weird scene that, and minor spoiler alert, doesn't go anywhere, where he calls to the stern and asks, what's report in, as if they wouldn't have reported in if they did see something. But he's like, what's stern report? And there's a white guy, and he cuts off a woman of color in the middle of answering. She already she starts answering that there's nothing, they don't see anything, and this white guy jumps in while she's in the middle and says, no visuals of the Shrike. Like, says it much quicker. Like, he knows time is of the essence, but like, you're left thinking like, that guy's gonna die, isn't he? And he might, honestly. I'm not sure. He didn't die immediately, which is what actually surprised me. In fact, now that the episode's over, I realize that kind of was just a weird scene. It didn't really go anywhere. I was expecting something. So apparently they just needed to see this woman be cut off by a white guy for reasons. I don't know. So we're told the warp drive isn't going to work inside the nebula, but also the warp drive is down. They've got to fix it. We're never quite sure at this point, why is the warp drive offline? Is the warp drive offline because they're in the nebula or because it took damage? Apparently it's a little bit of both. The science lady on the bridge, the bald lady, she says that the nebula is showing biological signs. And she's like, this is like no nebula I've ever seen before. And Captain Shaw's unfortunate line, anyone else want to throw any more weird shit at me? And like, we think we had shit twice in the first 5 minutes of this episode. And that really kind of like, I don't like the word shit, okay? It was funny when Data said it in Generations. They piled this with shit. But by the end of the episode, I do think this was a pretty good episode. So they kind of found their way out. Geordi's daughter, LaForge, goes, LaForge and somebody else on the bridge, Captain Shaw says, listen, you guys have been working straight for 36 hours. Holy shit, 36 hours. Why don't they have other people? Anyway, for whatever reason, they've been on duty for 36 hours straight. So Captain Shore orders them off to go get some rest while they can. And on her way to get rest, Geordi's daughter stops by Seven's quarters. Now Seven, again, at the end of last episode, Shore told Seven that she might have earned her commission back or whatever, because she did stop Jack from using the transporter. But then at the beginning of this episode, Seven is confined to quarters, and she has a guard posted in front of her quarters to make sure she doesn't leave, which I would have no problem with if at the end of last episode, Shaw didn't basically say that she was back on duty. So that took a little, I was confused as to, first I thought that the guy with LaForge was the other guy that Shaw relieved of duty and told to get rest. I was like, well, why the hell was he accompanying her to Seven's quarters, since he had Seven tells him to get lost, and he does. So I was like, well, why the hell did he even take the trip? And then I realized he didn't take the trip, he was the guard. So then I still don't understand why Seven would be able to dismiss him. I assume that he knows that that's still his first officer, and it's more of like a courtesy that he just walked down the hallway. He knows Seven's not going to leave, but if Seven could be trusted not to leave, why would he be appointed to guard her door anyway? It really didn't make a lot of sense, but she kind of dismisses him, and Geordi talks to her from her doorway. Like, I don't know if she went in the quarters or not, but for whatever reason, it was important the guard leave them alone. And Geordi's daughter says, and this this is another like nitpick, but it's a nitpick. Geordi's daughter is saying that, listen, she was the daughter of Geordi LaForge, the greatest engineer in Starfleet history. And I'm like, oh my God, a little sure of himself. But anyway, she said people were fine with her following in his footsteps, meaning had she become an engineer, she'd be fine. She said, but the moment I decided to become a pilot, that people just started saying, oh, that's only because Starfleet couldn't say no to Geordi's daughter. Like her decision to become a pilot was a problem. And I'm like, what in the actual fuck? Did they forget? Did everybody forget TNG season 1? Geordi was the pilot. Geordi LaForge was the pilot of the Enterprise. The blind man was flying the ship. He had the red shirt, and he sat there next to Data, and he flew the ship before he became the chief engineer. Geordi's piloting is in his blood, and he remained one of the best pilots on the ship, right? In chain of command. In chain of command, Captain Jellicoe went to Geordi, and he said, can you do this? And Geordi's like, I can fly it, but the person you really want is Riker, because Riker was the absolute best pilot on the ship. Geordi was probably second, but then Geordi became an engineer. So Geordi should be just as famous as a pilot as he is as an engineer. The daughter saying, once I decided to become a pilot, that is exactly what your father did. Your father was a pilot before he was an engineer. Maybe no one told you. Anyway, for some reason, they want, and remember, they told us last week or 2 weeks ago that her nickname was Crash LaForge. Maybe a person who crashed the shuttle 2 or 3 times, twice in the academy shouldn't be a pilot, but it has nothing to do with her father being the greatest engineer. Anyway, then we go to sickbay, where we have Jack and Beverly. They've been drafted into helping the injured on the Titan because, I don't understand where the medical staff of the Titan is. The only one we see apparently is the chief medical officer and Beverly and Jack. And Beverly and Jack is super overprotective of his mother. Somebody comes to talk to Beverly and Jack gets in their face. Like, who the fuck are you? And he doesn't say that. He doesn't say the F-bomb. I said it. But he's like, get away from my mom. I'm thinking, kid, your mom can take care of herself. By the way, Beverly completely healed. So I don't know how much time has passed. I thought this took place immediately after the end of the previous episode. But at the end of the previous episode, Beverly could barely stand. Riker had to walk her up to the bridge and hold her from falling over, and she couldn't talk. Now, this episode, Beverly is not only 100% better, but she's able to practice medicine. She's seeing patients. She's scanning them. She's helping them up and down and doing all types of things with them. Jack's helping her too. I don't know when she recovered, but she did. So then Captain Picard comes down to talk to Beverly, and luckily she just helped the last patient leave sickbay, and the entire sickbay of the Titan, which had a whole bunch of injured crew member, became completely empty so that they could have a heart-to-heart talk. And Beverly talks about do you remember our time on Casperia Prime? Now, Casperia Prime was a planet that was mentioned before in Deep Space Nine. Jadzia Dax was talking to Worf, and that's where she was planning to have their honeymoon on Casperia Prime. It's a very famous, very luxurious planet, kind of more like a high class Risa, and so it was cool to get that member berry. So apparently, Casperia Prime is where Jack Crusher was conceived. Picard and Beverly had their last hurrah there, and then Picard got called away early, and he's like, he didn't know that was going to be the last time they would see each other for 20 years. She's like, well, we broke it off. He's like, we just broke off the sex. We just broke off the romance. We were still going to be friends. I mean, he's like, and we'd broken off the romance 5 times before. It was the 5th time we broke off the romance. He's like, why didn't, he's honestly, and he's, rightfully upset with her. Like, how the F do you not tell me you were pregnant? And she's like, well, you were always saying that you never wanted to be a father and you didn't want to have a family and blah, blah. And he's like, he has one really good line. He's like, you don't get to condemn people before the fact. And I wish that was true. I wished that Patrick Stewart honestly believed that, because I don't think for a moment he does, but whatever. Beverly says, you told me you were afraid to have a son, a kid. You said you could never be a father. You could never be a kid. You could never be a father because you would be afraid that you would be your father, that you would do to your kid what your father did to you. Because remember from earlier in Picard seasons, his dad was so terrible, such a terrible father, because I don't know why exactly, but he did everything he could to stop his crazy wife from killing herself and her kids, but apparently that wasn't enough. However, if you go back to TNG, Picard's father was an asshole to him. Okay, when when Q gave Picard a chance to talk to his father after Picard supposedly died, and needed his heart. His heart had stopped, his mechanical heart, and in the afterlife. And Riker, why do I keep calling Q Riker? Q gave Picard a chance his dad to come up, and his dad is like, I always told you were going to get yourself killed. And Picard's like, please, Q, stop, get him away. So, I mean, like, his dad always was a dick. So I'm not too surprised that Picard doesn't like his father. But the fact that they completely ignore the fact that Picard was a father in a way. He lived that entire life in the episode Inner Light. He had an entire life where he lived and he became a parent, and he knew the joys and the loves of being a parent, and the feelings you get. He lived an entire lifetime, and it changed him. It changed him. He no longer feared children after that episode. Anyway, he makes some good points. He's like, you never gave me the chance. She's like, but what? Beverly also had some good points. She's like, listen, I knew that if he was your son, he'd have a mark on his back. And to be fair, there was already one Ferengi that we saw in TNG who was obsessed with killing Picard's son to the point that he made up a son. He found some woman Picard had sex with many, many years ago, and she happened to have a son from some other guy. The Ferengi gave the son a disease that changed his DNA to make it look like he was Picard's son. And this whole elaborate rouge to find out that, oh, it was never Picard's son. He just wanted him to think it was so that he could kill him. So Crusher knew that, Jesus Christ, Picard has so many enemies. If he really did have a son, somebody would go after him. And I guess she was right. But still, Picard says, don't you think that was my decision to make? And she said, well, whatever. And he's like, well, why didn't you tell him when he got older? And she's like, I did tell him. He decided he didn't want to have anything to do with you. Being the son of Jean-Luc Picard puts a target on your back. And then Beverly starts going on about how she lost her parents, then her husband, and then her son Wesley to the stars. So to her, Wesley is dead. To Beverly Crusher, Wesley Crusher is dead. And I kind of smiled. Now, unfortunately, we know Wesley is a traveler now, and he's travels time, and I don't know what happened to him. You know what? I prefer to think what Beverly thinks. Wesley's dead. So I'll stop. Maybe that's when this episode started getting good. When Wesley was officially listed as dead to Beverly Crusher. Oh my God. So then while Picard and Beverly are talking, Riker and Jack are in the hallway, and Jack is walking back and forth up and down the hallway, and Riker's just smiling at him. And it's almost as if that walking back and forth is something Picard would have done. But as far as I can remember, Picard never did that. And some Starfleet personnel walk down the hallway, and they kind of gleam. They look at Jack, and they're pissed off at him. And Jack says, I guess everybody hates him. And Riker's like, people are just looking at you like that because they know they know you're the reason they're in this situation. And he's like, you got to give them a reason. You got to own it. You got to give them a reason to like you, which I thought was kind of weird. So we go back to Beverly, and she's telling more to Picard that her and Jack do medicine on worlds Starfleet, quote unquote, forgot about. That also kind of stuck me. Like, really, does Starfleet forget about entire worlds? That doesn't seem like the Starfleet I knew. But then Picard calls in Jack's accent. He's like, why does he have that accent? And I was like, holy shit, they're actually going to address the accent. And Beverly says, well, he went to school in London, and he never managed to ditch the accent. So I guess they weren't off doing medicine on forgotten worlds if he went to school in London for presumably years and years to pick up a real British French accent. Whatever. And that's when he tells Picard that, yeah, I gave him your info, and he didn't want to contact you. At the moment Picard heard that, Picard was done. Picard's like, well, again, this is me saying it, not him. He's like, well, fuck that guy. If he doesn't want anything to do with me, I don't want anything to do with him. So Picard leaves sickbay. He completely ignores Jack, looks at Riker, and tells Riker to come with him. They have to talk. And Picard tells Riker he made the wrong decision. He has to apologize to Captain Shaw. and he should never have put the crew's life in danger to save his son. And at the very same time, we see the Titan is at a dead stop in the nebula. The Titan is not moving through the nebula. It's stopped. They found a place to hide, and they came to a stop. And then the girl and the guy who were looking out the stern windows for the Shrike, the girl is the first to see it. So she calls to the bridge, bridge, the Shrike, it's coming. It's like 3,000 meters away. And Shaw is on the bridge, and he's like dumbfounded. He's like, how is it possible? How is it possible they found us? And I'm thinking, maybe because you stopped the fucking ship. Maybe had you still been moving, you would have been harder to find. But you just stopped. And Vadic on her ship, they're like, there's the Titan. And she's like, right where they should be. And that didn't really make any sense to me. And I thought maybe they would explain that line later in the episode, but they never do. They never do, like right where they should be. We do find later in the episode, she has a way to track the Titan, which I think we all realize she did at this point. So I'm not really a spoiler, but right where they should be really didn't make a lot of sense, and it still doesn't. So then Captain Shaw gets injured because the Shrike is shooting at the Titan, and everybody's getting, a lot of people got injured again. Shaw's very injured, but he's enough to put Riker in command, and which is weird because Admiral Picard was kind of in command at the ending of last episode, but Shaw looks at Riker, claims Riker got us into this, you get us out of it. And he transfers the command codes to Riker, which is weird. Why wouldn't Picard be in charge? So Picard then becomes Riker's number one. In fact, Picard even says, Riker, I think it's time you call me number one. And so at first they're kind of like into this whole role reversal. And Picard suggests that they detonate a photon torpedo with a phaser because the concussion should push the Shrike away. Now, I don't understand if you could get a photon torpedo 90% of the way to the Shrike and then you blow it up with a phaser, wouldn't it have just been better to shoot the Shrike with the torpedo to begin with? Wouldn't that have created just as big concussion force and perhaps damaged the Shrike? No. Although it does, we get to see that the Shrike uses phasers. So for the first time I can remember, the Titan uses its phaser, detonates one torpedo, and the force of the torpedo exploding just pushes the Shrike off camera, like it was getting hit with a tidal wave. It's gone. One torpedo, it's gone. So then we switch scenes to the La Sirena. Raffi is asleep in her bed on the La Sirena. She wakes up and she basically has the TV on a fake news channel, and they're watching. It's talking about the still 117 people dead, and how Starfleet intelligence still blaming it solely on that one Romulan Toluco. And then Raffi hears what apparently is Klingon opera in the distance, muted in the distance. So Raffi picks up her gun, which I stopped it 3 times to look. It looked to me like an actual pistol. Now it does turn out later to be a phaser pistol, but man, in this first scene, I thought she was picking up a Glock, like a chrome-plated Glock. Maybe Glocks are always black. I don't know. I really don't know my pistols all that much, but it looked like a modern weapon, didn't look like a phaser until later. And still never looked like a phaser. But she gets her shiny gun, and of course, in the back of the La Sirena, listening to Klingon opera, is Worf doing exercises with his sword. Raffi tries to pull the gun on Worf. Worf throws his dagger just as a distraction, instantly disarms her, and Worf does this badass introduction. He says, I am Worf, son of Moog, house of Martok, son of Sergei, house of Roshenko, bane to the Doras family, slayer of Gowron, and I have made some chamomile tea. Do you take sugar? And she's like, what the fuck? And I liked this Worf intro. I really did. I like that they, recanonized the fact that he is indeed from the House of Martok. After Nemesis, they seemed like they forgot that he was ever on DS9. So they remind us he was in the House of Martok. They remind us that he did kill Gowron. I question two things. First, I don't think he would ever put Bane of the Doras family in his official title, because that gives too much power to the Doras family. The Doras family has no honor. He shouldn't even bring up their name. The fact that he brings up their name kind of gives them more credit than is due. And also, I would also question Slayer of Gowron. I mean, Gowron was a pretty popular politician for a while. Yeah, he went crazy at the end, but I don't know I would have it in my official title, but whatever. If he wants it, then sure. And the chamomile tea, okay. I get it. They're showing Worf is both a Klingon warrior, but he's also been tempered by some human customs. So Raffi is like in awe. She's like, you're a legend. She knew exactly who Worf was. She's like, you're exactly what I thought you would be. And except she's like, and also not, because she was really confused about the chamomile tea. And then she says, the last thing I remember was I was going to be killed by the Ferengi. And then they take the time to replay the murder scenes from last week, including the decapitation. And this is like, why do they have to show this again? But they do. And he says, well, it's not your time. She's like, I thought I was dead. And he's like, no, it's not your time to join the dead yet. So she's like, you're with Starfleet? And she's like, you're my handler? You're with Starfleet? And Worf says, no, I'm not really with Starfleet. He's like, think of me like a subcontractor. And I started worrying that he was going to be Section 31. And I'm still got some concerns he might be. But again, we're going to get a lot of changes towards the end of this episode that it doesn't seem like that big a deal anymore. So Raffi questions why she does this to her life. Why did she, risk her life and her sobriety? Why does she make all these terrible choices? And I think because you're a terrible character, you're a terrible person, and I wish you weren't on the show. Then Worf, this is the most disappointing line to me. Worf says, you have the heart of the warrior, a heart of a warrior, and the instincts of a warrior. And I'm thinking, no, she doesn't. Worf, she's really just a fucking loser. Please leave her behind. But no, No, they team up one of the greatest characters in Starfleet history, Worf, with one of the worst characters in Starfleet history, and not counting Discovery, because every one of those characters is the worst character in Starfleet history. But the worst non-Discovery Starfleet character, Raffi. And you know what? After the team up, it kind of helps out Raffi. It really does. Raffi with Worf is actually manageable, but we'll get to it. So then we go back to the Titan, where Riker and Picard are discussing basic strategy on the bridge alone. I mean, they don't ask anyone else. Like, I mean, why was Riker appointed by the captain? I know Seven's his first officer. Don't they have a second officer? Or who else would be third in command? Why aren't they involved? Okay, it's like Riker and Picard are talking about how best to deal with the Titan. Neither one of them really know how the Titan works. It's a completely refit ship. Neither of them have any, practical experience on the Titan. Why aren't they talking to someone? Why don't they have someone who's been on the ship for their, months or years? Somebody who knows what the fuck they're doing. Somebody who knows, who's capable of what. They're just talking amongst themselves in the middle of the bridge with LaForge and other officers, kind of like not even in the discussion. So then we get to sickbay, and Shaw is dying. There's a blood trail because Shaw was bleeding heavily when he got to sickbay. You could see the blood all the way down the hallway. He's on a bio bed. The Titan's chief medical officer is working on him, and Beverly butts in, and the chief medical officer is like, I got him. You take care of everybody else. But of course, Beverly knows better than the Titan's chief medical officer, and she starts scanning Shaw, and she starts asking him, does this hurt? Does this hurt? And the chief medical officer is like, he's fine. There's no internal bleeding. But Beverly says there's delayed internal bleeding in cases like this. And she touches Shaw somewhere, and he hurts. And he's like, she's like, get away from him, Beverly. Beverly tells the other doctor to fuck off. She's taking care of Shaw, her and Jack. And of course, they're probably going to save his life. But before they start working on him really hard, Captain Shaw calls Jack over to him and says, how do they keep finding us? How do they keep finding them? And I'm thinking, they found you once, and that's because you fucking stopped the ship. If you had kept moving, they probably wouldn't have found you, but whatever. So Jack gets the idea of how did they find us, and he sees the trail of blood leading to the table, and he gets the idea, oh my God, we must be leaving some type of a breadcrumb trail for them to follow. So Jack leaves sickbay while his mother was working on Shaw, and he tries to go to the bridge. But for the first time in Trek history that I can remember, somebody's actually denied entry to the bridge. And, usually, in the original series and TNG, at least, there was a turbo lift that opens right on the bridge. You just walk out. But luckily for this scene, there's apparently no turbo lifts that open on the Titan's bridge. You actually have to walk down a corridor and go through a door to get on the bridge. And they've pointed a security guard to prevent people from coming on the bridge for the first time in Star Trek history. I have never seen this before. there's an actual security guard preventing access to the bridge. And Jack is like, I need to get on the bridge. I need to tell them something important. And the security guard's like, sorry, it's that red alert, go away. And rather than push his way through or try to reason with the guy, he just leaves. He leaves. Crazy. So then we see the Shrike, and the Shrike is coming in to attack. For reasons, the Titan can't go to warp yet. And we get, oh no, she's charging whatever that mysterious weapon is that was in her main bay. And so we finally see what the secret weapon is. And not to my surprise anyway, it's the portal gun. It's the same technology that was used to drop the base that killed the 117 people. But now it's being used in space, although it's used differently. Like the portal gun, when it was used to collapse the building, it had this ring of light appear around the building. Now instead, it shoots like a ball of plasma, and then the plasma turns into a portal, and whatever comes out the portal, then a second portal appears nearby, and whatever goes in the one portal comes out the other portal. What the purpose of this technology is, I can't fathom. What is the actual use for creating a wormhole that goes, maybe a mile away? I don't understand. But whatever, they have it, and it takes forever to create the portal. And I don't understand. They put a portal every time the Titan tries to get away, not at warp for whatever reason. Like they're at impulse, and they shoot a portal in front of it, and they can't stop or turn the ship in time. And they always go through the portal and appear right back in front of the Shrike. They try it twice. They can't get away. And so Picard is trying to get Riker to fight. He's like, you got to fight. We have to fight him off now. And Riker says, no, we got to go hide in the nebula. And this is Picard's getting annoyed. And Admiral Picard does outrank, I thought, Captain Riker, but for whatever reason, Admiral Picard doesn't attempt to pull rank. He just goes back and quietly sits down, and Riker says, go back and hide in the nebula. So then we get back to Worf and Raffi, and they remind us that they're still on Matalas Prime. Matalas Prime is where everything's going down, apparently. And so Worf says, listen, earlier, Worf told Raffi that they knew the guy that they were looking for. He's a human. I forget his name. It really doesn't matter. But he's the guy that paid the Ferengi to lie about, blaming it on Toluco. And so they were looking for him. And it turns out that this guy is also on Matalas Prime. Why would he be on Matalas Prime? I have no effing idea. But, and even after admitting Worf said, listen, Raffi, you blew your cover. She's back on Matalas Prime as a drug addict again. So I don't know what blowing your cover means. Usually when you blow your cover, you can't go back and be the person you were just pretending to be. But in this universe, you can. So Raffi and Worf are both on Matalas Prime. They are both nonchalantly talking to each other through a communicator. Of course, everyone else just sees people talking to themselves and don't think twice about it. And with the help of Worf and Raffi, they track down the guy that they were looking for. They catch him. It was hardly an inconvenience. And there's a joke when Worf takes the guy, instead of killing him, he hits him or whatever, knocks him out. which really doesn't make a lot of sense, coming and what we know later. And as a joke, Worf says beheadings are on Wednesdays, which is a bit of a lame joke. Okay, so then we go back to the Titan, and Jack, instead of going to the bridge, he goes to see Seven instead, which I don't know why, but he talks his way past that guard and gets into Seven's quarters. And so he's telling Seven, hey, you were a Fenris Ranger, right? And she's like, I don't want to talk about it. He's like, no, but you guys know things. You know, like leaving a breadcrumb trail somehow. And Seven's like, yeah, that's right. You don't even need sensors if you leave a breadcrumb trail. All you need is a mass spectrometer. What the fuck is she talking about? So the ship is getting shot to hell while all this is going on. And so Seven says, oh, I know what it must be. We must be leaking something. I bet we're leaking deuterium. That's what the warp nacelles protect from. And that's kind of weird that she would know that right away. And so she tries to leave her quarters, and the guard stops her and says, hey, the captain's order still stands. I guess Riker didn't release her. He should now that he's in command. But rather than try to talk to him or say, hey, the captain's incapacitated, maybe you should double check with Captain Riker. Instead, Jack sucker punches the much bigger security officer. One punch, knockout. The guy falls over on the ground. And Seven says, well, you're crazy. I'm thinking, he's your guy. You're his first officer, the guy that just got sucker punched. Maybe tell Jack next time, leave it to me or something. I don't know. It felt very disrespectful. But of course, they had to get out for the plot to continue. And so they run to what appears to be engineering, but there was nobody there. There was nobody there. And it was leaking deuterium gas. And so they had to put on masks because it's deadly. And Seven looks and says, oh, look, someone deactivated the atmospheric diagnostics so the computer couldn't detect the leak. So you knew right away that there was a saboteur on board, but they didn't realize it. It wasn't until they opened a panel and they saw that I don't know if it was the sensor or what was phasered, and that's when they finally realized, there's it's sabotage. So Seven then goes communicates to the bridge, and she says, listen, there's a saboteur on board or whatever. We were leaking deuterium gas. That's how they were tracking us. And they don't seem concerned that there's a saboteur on board at all. Riker and Picard again start arguing about how to proceed. And then we see the weird guy from episode 1, the guy who was in the bar watching Picard and Riker talk, and then he was a crew member on the ship, and now he was the one who sabotaged the ship. That much was obvious. But here is where it all changes. Here is where the episode and everything changes. So I strongly suggest that if you can, you watch this episode yourself. Because once you go past this part, there's no turning back. It's all spoiled from here. Okay. So the guy, so Jack goes to fix, they separate. Jack and Seven separate. Jack is trying to fix the leak in one of the compartments, and the weird guy who was following Riker and Picard, show up, and he and Jack start to fight. And Jack, who obviously can one punch knock out a Starfleet security officer twice his size, punches the guy, and he just kind of takes it. And I'm like, oh shit, this is it. I was like, it's the conspiracy aliens. They're 5 times stronger than a human being. It was just like when they punched out that old admiral, and he's like, I'm much stronger than you people. And I thought, oh my God, this is it. This is the reveal. We're going to see the back of his neck. And then his face becomes gelatinous. He's a changeling. He's a changeling. They brought the changelings back. They brought the changelings back. And my emotions were going all over the place. This actually answers a lot of questions. But on another part, are they going to do us wrong? I'm scared now. I'm afraid. Are they just trying to rape the corpse of Deep Space Nine? Well, it is a very attractive corpse. I don't know. But I'm like, oh my God, the changelings are back. And before I can know what to think, we go back to Raffi and Worf, and they're interrogating the guy that they picked up, the human, and they're playing good cop, bad cop. Raffi's the bad cop. Worf is apparently the good cop. Worf starts talking. Raffi is like, I'm going to pull apart your fingernails. I'm going to, pull out your intestines and do all this terrible shit to you. The guy appears to be going through withdrawal. She's like, yeah, I know withdrawal. It's a hell. People beg to die. I know, I've been there. And Worf is trying to tell him, he's like, listen, there's no such thing as good and evil. It's just, everybody's got a past. We can all be better. We can all do this. And I'm really hoping that Worf doesn't believe this shit. I really hope he's just trying to say that as his good cop routine to try to get him to talk. But he says it, and I'm not so happy with that. Anyway, they're roughing him up. Raffi's roughing him up, but they're not roughing him up. He is going through withdrawal, and he is kind of roughing himself up. He's about to crack. He's about to crack. So then we go back to the Titan, and Jack, who was punched out. Jack was punched out by the Changeling. So Jack is having a crazy dream with Seven in it, where Seven is kind of Borg, kind of a fungus, almost like the fungus from the Enterprise episode Vox Solar, except red, and it's kind of growing behind her. And it turns out that the real Seven was waking Jack up. He got poisoned by the gas, and so Seven's taking him to sick bay. So Seven contacts the bridge and says, Picard, Jack's injured. I'm taking him to sick bay. And I'm thinking, how does she know Jack's Picard's son? I mean, she wasn't on the bridge when Picard yelled, he's my son. But whatever. However she knew. So then Picard looks at Riker, and Riker's like, go, man, go. And we get Picard running to sickbay on a turbo lift. And of course, this is Picard's 17-second turbo lift ride, the longest ride of his life. When he gets to sickbay, and despite talking to Seven, moments ago, Jack is now on the bio bed, for all intents and purposes, dead, no readings. And Beverly is using, the futuristic paddles of life on him. And his own mother is his doctor, and she's an emotional wreck, obviously. She's trying so hard to get him back to life. She keeps zapping him and zapping him. And Picard gets there and he sees this in slow motion. So Picard and Beverly are there, and Beverly's zapping. And obviously, what was going to be the very last try, he wakes up. Jack wakes up, he regains consciousness, and we're like, oh, okay. Well, to nobody's surprise, Jack doesn't die. Then we get back to Worf and Raffi, and the guy is, so Worf is like, who did this? Who's the one who paid you to blame the Romulans? And the guy finally starts talking. He's like, it's too late. He's like, it was me. There's like-minded souls. We all hate the Federation. So Raffi is saying, why would they do this? He's like, they stole something bigger from the Daystrom Institute. Even more dangerous than this portal weapon. The portal weapon was just to confuse the Federation. And then they find out the guy is not going through withdrawal. The guy's also a shapeshifter. And he's been holding his human form too long. He's got to revert back to his liquid state. And Worf understands, and Worf recognizes it. And he asks him, how long have you been away from the Great Link? And the guy's like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Actually, no, before he answers, we go back to Picard. And now Picard is back on the bridge of the Titan. And he tells Riker for like the third time, we can't run any longer. And again, they're fighting on the bridge in front of all the other more junior officers about basic strategy. And someone yells out, the Shrike is close. Picard and Riker would never have these fights on the bridge nonetheless. I mean, this whole series, they've been buddy-buddy. Now Riker gets command for reasons, and it's like, go to your room, old man. So now Raffi and Worf and the Changeling says it's too late. All your solid worlds are going to be destroyed. The Federation's going to crumble, and he loses his solid shape, and he tries to get away as a liquid, and Worf vaporizes him with a phaser. Boop, and he vaporized. And I get this one, okay? This one I get. This kill I get. How are you going to, you can't stun a shapeshifter. If he doesn't have the technology to force him to stay a liquid, he's just going to get away. You've got to kill him. I get that. I'm going to give him a pass for that kill. That kill would have had to happen in any Trek series. Those other kills, those would have been stuns in any other series. So Jack, who's now awake in sickbay, and Seven, who mysteriously wasn't there when the paddles of life were being used on him, is back in sickbay. And now Jack is telling Seven that the guy's face moved like a changeling. So now Seven knows there's a changeling aboard the Titan. Why didn't he tell that when he first woke up? I don't know. So then we're back with Worf, and Worf is telling Raffi, and this is some exposition. Worf tells Raffi, after the Dominion War ended, some changelings broke away from the Great Link, unwilling to accept defeat. There was a schism, and Worf was contacted by a close friend within the link, a man of honor, obviously meaning Odo. And he informed Worf of the rogue group of changelings. But, he says, if Starfleet acknowledges their existence, it will reignite the Dominion War. What? That makes no sense. If Starfleet acknowledges the existence of a rogue group of changelings, that will reignite the Dominion War? No, it doesn't. If the changelings warned you, hey, there's a rogue group of changelings, that does not reignite the Dominion War. So for some reason, that's the reason they're telling us that they can't fight this rogue group of changelings in public. They have to do it in private, because if the public knew that there were changelings on the loose, they would have to. Who would they go to war with? The Dominion, and would they go through the wormhole and attack the Dominion homeworld? That doesn't make any sense. Anyway, Worf reminds Raffi that changelings can look like any species, any person. So then we're back on the Titan, and the Titan tries to get away, but they never stopped or even looked for the saboteur. So before they could warp away, of course, an explosion destroys a power conduit, and warp is offline. So then finally, Picard's like, we've got to attack now. We've got no other choice. So Riker gives in to Picard's decision, and Riker orders that they come around. And the guy's like, if we calculated right, we're coming up right behind the Shrike. And they come out of the nebula, and the Shrike is there, but the Shrike has already turned and is facing the Titan. So Riker yells, well, Picard's like, oh my God, they've already turned. So Riker yells, fire everything we've got. And apparently, everything they've got, even though we know they had phasers because they used them earlier, but everything they got is 4 photon torpedoes. Don't get me wrong, 4 photon torpedoes generally is enough to destroy a ship, but that's all they've got. So they fire 4 photon torpedoes, pew, 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 pew. And of course, the Shrike uses their portal weapon, which this time works very fast. The first time we saw it, it worked incredibly slow. This time, the portal weapon was able to come online and make a portal very quickly. And it makes the portal to make all the photon torpedoes go into it. And then, of course, the portal appears behind the Titan, so the Titans get struck with their own 4 photon torpedoes. The Titan takes massive damage, and the ship is clearly disabled, and it's falling into the gravity well of this mysterious biological space anomaly. This whole episode, the science woman was saying that she doesn't suggest getting any closer inside this nebula. It's not really a nebula. It's a biological space anomaly. And she says, no, we shouldn't get any deeper in. We have no idea what would happen if we go into the center of this thing. And now they're headed directly for the center of the space anomaly. Riker looks at Picard and says, you just killed us all. Remove yourself from the bridge. And like this kind of breaks character. Why? Riker made the decision to attack. Picard gave him the advice, but Riker made the decision. Nobody killed them all. First, also, they don't do anything like abandon ship. They don't do anything such as that. They're just going to accept their fate. No, they don't try to do anything. And the Shrike, who wanted Jack alive for some reason, apparently doesn't care that Jack's about to die. The Shrike could have used their tractor beam to tractor the Titan away, but they didn't for some reason, because obviously they got to fall into this anomaly. And we all know the anomaly's not going to kill them all. But of course, that's what we're led to believe, that they're all going to die. And episode ended, and we're reminded it's directed by Jonathan Frakes. And I am left speechless. Now I know what I just read to you, what I just told you still sounded like a poor episode. I mean, how am I supposed to say that this was a great episode? And yet it was. This was a very good episode. Understand, I am giving you my biggest problems, my biggest nitpicks. And you can nitpick anything. But the difference between this week and last week is serious. It's last week I was sick to my stomach at the end of that episode. At the end of this episode, I am filled with optimism. This is not TNG. This is not a return to TNG, and it's not going to be. This is different Trek, but at least overall, the story was solid. They actually answered questions. The fact that we know these enemies now are changelings, rogue changelings, makes some more sense. I can understand what's going on. I can understand why they're angry. We don't know why they're particularly interested in Jack Crusher. I can only assume that will get filled in a future episode. If we never get why Jack Crusher was important, then yeah, of course that's going to destroy the series. But we got enough things answered in episode 3. I am really looking forward now to episode 4. I truly am. Am I changing my opinions on the first 2 episodes? No. The first 2 episodes were shitty episodes. But this episode was not. And this episode, for the first time this season or this series, makes me think maybe there is good Trek to come. This episode is easily an 8.5 out of 10. And I was expecting it to be crap. Maybe that's why. Maybe my expectations were finally so low that they came in way above. But easily an 8.5 out of 10. And if this is the way the season goes, I will be a very happy Trekkie. I will be sad. It's not the way I would have done it, but I can live with this. I can live with it. Bird out.